reference this morning, in keeping with our subject, be a divine magnet, has to do with important things which we must first do before we can hope to be a great magnet of God's power. We have to eliminate the ego. We have to lift the Son of Man that he become a Son of God. Our first reference from St. John, the 3rd chapter, 14th verse, where we read as follows. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. What did Moses do? Moses communed with God in the darkness within until finally the light of God came to him. And by that extra power, added power of the presence of God, he aroused the sleeping serpent power within him at the base of his spine. That extra power lifted his worldly bodily consciousness to the supreme center of the thousand-rayed lotus, and he became a son of God. As Moses did, so can each and every one of us lift that Son of Man consciousness, bodily consciousness, that it become divine, that it become spiritual in the thousand-rayed lotus, the great supreme center where God dwells. And then, same in chapter the 30th verse, where it most beautifully says, he must increase, but I must decrease. In other words, the I is the ego. That must decrease. He cannot increase, which means Christ's consciousness within me. Spiritual consciousness, the presence of God, cannot increase until I decrease. Until the ego, which ties us to this vehicle, this bodily vehicle, is eliminated. Then he, the presence of God within us, can increase. The most beautiful short verse, but very much to the point. Then St. John, 12th chapter, 32nd verse. And this is most wonderful because in this verse, if we use our intuition, we will find the key to all power from God. 32nd verse, 12th chapter, where we read as follows. If I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. If I be lifted up from the earth means that if the soul consciousness within us, the presence of God within us, be dislodged from the bodily or earthly consciousness and rise to the supreme center, the power of God which I contact at that point will draw all things, everything I need, every possible thing that you can think of, all power, all strength, the greatest of all, the love of the infinite. It is that which will draw all things back to God. I read it once more. And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. Only that power of the great pull of God can get us out of this delusion that we are the body. It's too strong to do it by will, mind, and intellect. But the great magnetic pull of the omniscience of God can lift us into what we surely are and really should be, sons of God, one with his great omniscient love. morning, be a divine magnet. Be a divine magnet. To be a divine magnet, please realize that you must be saintly and divine. You must be one with the great magnetic power of the omniscience of God. Otherwise, how can you expect to be a channel through which the great power of God can flow? How can you be a true channel to lift others unless His power flows through you? Therefore, realize to be a divine magnet, you must make yourself divine. You must make yourself one with the magnetic power of God's omniscience. And so this subject suggests a few words about magnetism. Master has said about magnetism consists of an attractive force inherent in various degrees in all finite bodies, from the smallest grain of sand to the great sun itself. What holds it together? The great magnetic power, the great attractive force of God. Magnetism is in everything. Now, there are two great forces in the universe which we must know about to understand just a little about magnetism. The first is the great creative force, the force of repulsion. These two forces, the other is attraction, far greater than the great creative force. These two forces come from the one eternal presence of God as consciousness plus its power. This great force of repulsion has made all things, has created all things. And the great force of God's pull, the great attracting force, is pulling all things back to God. All those things that have been created are held together by this attracting force of God. Your body is held as it is because it was created by the first force, the force of repulsion. It is held in its form as an entity by the great pulling power of God. But it does not stop there. That great force of attraction of God is pulling all things back to Him. And that great force of attraction, that emancipating force, is in all forms of magnetism. From as I have said, from the magnetism which holds the sun and the planets together, to that force which is holding the electron as it flies around the nucleus. The same force is holding the plants together, the body of the plants. The same force is holding you as an entity in your present form. And so we should realize that this great attractive force of God is behind everything. That is the most tremendous force in the universe. That force is greater than the creative force because all things will return to the source from which they have come. All things will go back to God. You and I are bound sometime to go back to God. Why wait? Why not do it now? Why not unite your consciousness and the power of your consciousness with the omniscience of God? You and yourselves cannot take yourselves back to God. He has to do it. His great force, magnetic force, His pull, His great force of love, will take each and every one of us back if we but make the contact, if we but become one with Him. And so, let us say just a word or two about the different forms of magnetism, that you understand a little better about being a divine magnet. Universal magnetism is behind all forms of magnetism. That is, the great creative force of God goes out, the great attractive force of God is pulling all things back. But there are various kinds of magnetism. From what, as I have said, from that which holds the electron to that great power of God, the omniscience of God's presence in us. That's the greatest magnetism, if we can but be one with that power. We have solar magnetism, of which I have spoken, whereby the planets revolve around the sun, with which we are familiar. It is that universal magnetism that holds them, according to God's plan. Then we have electronic magnetism, whereby the nucleus is held as it flies around. The electron is held in its proper course as it flies around the nucleus. Then we have atomic, molecular, elemental magnetism. This is the cohesive power which holds the atoms in their correct places. The molecules are held together by universal magnetism. The elements which form this world and your body and my body are held together by a form of this universal magnetism, a part of the great magnetic pull of God. And the plant is held in its form by universal magnetism. Otherwise, how does the rose assume that form? How do these flowers assume that form? How does the tree keep its form? By the pull of God holding it in that shape. Universal magnetism is behind all forms of magnetism. Now we come a little nearer home. About animal magnetism, we must say a word or two, because some people confuse it with spiritual magnetism. Animal magnetism is a part of that universal magnetism which holds the form of the various creations of God. All forms, all animal forms, are held by that part of universal magnetism known as animal magnetism. That also, that pulling power in each one of us, in every form of creation, living form, has the power to attract another form. That's what we must realize. Animal magnetism is a force. Just like, you know, the snake will use that force of animal magnetism in attracting a smaller prey. The pulling power of the body of an animal or any vehicle created by God has an attractive pull on another. And so in young people, we must not make the mistake of confusing this animal magnetism with spiritual magnetism. It is not the same. It is limited by the power of the body, the attractive pull of the body as an entity. But spiritual magnetism is unlimited, because it is from the omniscience of God. So do not be sidetracked by animal magnetism. Realize it is not spiritual magnetism. Spiritual magnetism is backed up by the omniscience of God. Animal magnetism by the limitations of the body, which gives forth the pulling power. That one thing we should realize. Now, soul magnetism is a higher form of magnetism, because souls are rays of spirit, and as such have the power to utilize the magnetic pull of the omniscience of God. Soul magnetism is the power of the soul going back to God. Soul magnetism is inherent in the hearts of each and every one of us. It is inherent in everything. It is the great pull of God, because souls, remember, are rays of spirit, and as such have the magnetic power of spiritual consciousness, the dynamic consciousness of the omniscience of God. You can see now there's quite a difference between animal magnetism and soul magnetism. Then we pass on to the highest form of magnetism, which is spiritual magnetism. Spiritual magnetism, realize, is the pulling power of spirit, the pulling power of the omniscience of God, the magnetic power to draw all things back home to Him. And so you can see, if you are to be a real magnet, a divine magnet, you have to be a vehicle of God's spiritual magnetism, not of animal magnetism, not of ego magnetism. I guess there's some such thing. Some people have big enough ego to draw lots to them. But spiritual magnetism realizes the power of the omniscience of God. Quite different, is it not? Spiritual magnetism we must know more about. Unlike the other forms of magnetism, as I have said, these various forms of which I have spoken, it is not limited. Animal magnetism is limited by the pull of the particular body of the animal, and other things according to the pull of the different bodies which they represent. But spiritual magnetism is unlimited. It is not bound by the lower laws of magnetism, because it is the power, the pull of the omniscience of God. Realize that. Spiritual magnetism is the magnetic pull of the omniscience of God. That's what we want. We must have that if we are to be divine magnets. Master has said these words, which I think that we can remember if we are to be divine magnets. If you are to be a divine magnet, as I have said, you've got to be one of the omniscience of God. Therefore, you've got to be that omniscience. And to be that omniscience, you've got to be one with it. So he has said these words: one who meditates on the image and qualities of a spiritual man attracts his nature and partakes of his spiritual magnetism, because that spiritual man emanates what? The omniscience of God. That's why those who meditate on the pictures of the different saints, and especially those who take the name of the great Babaji, who is a tremendous channel of spiritual magnetism, it is said that if you take his name, visualize him if you can, take his name, you immediately attract the blessings of spiritual magnetism. Because Babaji is a tremendous channel through which the magnetic power of the omniscience of God flows to all of those who tune in, so to speak, with that channel. So that is what the Master meant by these encouraging words. Those who meditate upon the image and likeness of a spiritual man attracts his nature and qualities. And so if you keep the vision of the great ones, our beloved Master, always with you, and especially if you can keep in communion and contact and feeling the presence of God, you're bound to become like Him. You're bound to become gradually one with the omniscience of God. And so now, as to using spiritual magnetism to become a divine magnet. How to do that? How? It's simple. I've told you already. By meditating on the Om vibration, the holy vibration, and God. There's no other way. There's no other way to do it. There's no short way. There's no shortcut. If you are to be a spiritual magnet, you must become the omniscience of God, and the way is to be in God's company, to be in company with the omniscience of His presence right within you. And we have it right within us as the holy vibration, the great Om sound, the sound of many waters, the Amen. That's the presence of God within us. And if we keep that constantly in our consciousness, keep the contact, we are bound to become that one great consciousness of God. And so, we can, by the laws of association and assimilation, very simple. If you keep in contact, as the Master has said, with the great saints, you become like them. So if you keep in contact with God, who is the holy vibration within us, the great Om sound, His great love, His light. If you keep in contact with that through the laws of association and assimilation, you're bound to be like that. You are bound to be it. That's spiritual law. And so if you want to be a divine magnet, be in God's company, more and more. If you're in the company, as I often say, of worldly people, it's very easy, is it not, to be like them? It's very easy to do the things they do in spite of yourself. And it's really, if you keep in the contact of God, it's easy to be like Him, due to this wonderful law which He has left, the law of association, environment, if you want to call it, and assimilation. You become like that with which you mix. That great power of God flows through you. It changes you. All the cells of the body are changed. The vibration of the cells of your body, instead of vibrating as an ordinary human being, they vibrate as a spiritual being. Vibrating that way, you can be a divine magnet. That's the blessing or the gift of God. That's the grace of God. It isn't something you have to earn. You simply have to do it, that's all. You have to be in His company. Now, the spiritual magnetism of Jesus was simply the outward effect of an inner awareness. Realize that. The outward effect of something that was within Jesus. The outward effect of an inner awareness. What was that inner awareness? Literally, Jesus was one with the presence of God within Him, the great light of God. Literally, Jesus was one with the cosmic vibration, the holy vibration. And being one with that, He was one with the power behind that vibration, the great cosmic forces. And literally, Jesus felt the strength of the omniscience of God flowing through Him. He was one with that. That's why He manifested the different miracles. That's why the spiritual power flowed through Him, because Jesus was one with the omniscience of God within Him. Jesus felt the strength of what? He said, I and my Father are one, so He felt the strength of the power of God, which is divine magnetism, which is spiritual magnetism. Now, as Jesus did, so do we have to do. There's no other way. Don't think because Jesus did that you can't. No. God would not do that. He would not set such an example. The Master had that tremendous power of God within Him. He came here. Why? To show us the way, to set the example, that each one of us could be a divine magnet. And so we have to do as Jesus did. We have to be one with this presence of God within us, the holy vibration, the great Om sound with its aspects of light, the great light of God seen at this point, the great cosmic vibration in which is the power of God, the power of cosmic forces, and the feeling, the strength which comes when you feel the presence of God within you. What do you feel? You feel the power of the omniscience of God. If we are to be a divine magnet, we must realize that. That's true wisdom, is it not? True wisdom simply means that you become one with the source of all wisdom, the great omniscience, all pervading, all attentive, all knowing, all fulfilling omniscience of our one Father. If we can utilize that, if we can be that, there's no question that we will be a divine magnet. Now, Paramhansa Yogananda, the founder of Self-Realization Fellowship, has these words to say. And of course, these words give us the key to the whole situation of being a divine magnet. He says words to this effect, that if morning, noon, and night, not once in a while, not Sundays when you come here or Friday nights, and Thursday nights. That won't do. Morning, noon, and night. If you keep the contact of the presence of God within you, if you keep feeling it, sensing it, the presence of God within you, what happens? He says that you develop a power to draw all objects of your desire to you. If the magnetic power of God is supreme in the universe, if you are one with it, and that omniscient consciousness of God knows all things, don't you think it can bring to you what you need? We don't realize what we have at our command. And so Master has said, if morning, noon, and night you keep in contact with the omniscience of God, the great magnetic power of the omniscience of God, you will develop within you the same power to do what? To draw all things, objects of your desire. Greater than that, though, you will develop the power to uplift people just by the contact of your sight. Greater than that, you will have the power to uplift people by the silent wish only, of your strongly concentrated presence of God within you, the divine attracting power. Now, if you really want to help people by being a divine magnet, get to contact with God. Realize the Master's words. Just by the silent wish, after you have contact with God, you can help others by your deeply concentrated, attractive presence of God within you. You see, it is God who does it. We try to do it ourselves. That's why we fail. But if we make the contact with Him, as He is supreme in everything, and especially in the dynamic power of His presence, we can help others, lift them, even by wishing God to help them. Isn't that wonderful? It's the most wonderful thing. These are truths the Master has given to you. Do not neglect them. Do not miss them. We also develop the power to make all the elements bow to our wishes. I have seen the Master do that. I remember one time at Mount Washington, a severe storm, and the windows were bending in, so to speak, on the third floor. He went downstairs, and being in contact with the great magnetic power of God's omniscience, he did a little ceremony on the front steps, and the wind died down. I was out in the storm, of which I've told you many times. I will not burden you again. But it was, because the Master was one with the omniscience of God and its great power, that I was saved from oblivion in that storm. Also, we create within us, by being one with God, we create the power to attract angels, which simply mean the great rays of the heavenly forces to come to our aid. And we also have the power to persuade, the Master says most beautifully, the saints and sages of the past, and all knowledge to come and be dynamic to our consciousness. Isn't that wonderful? Now, Master has never told me anything that didn't come true, and I know he never would have written this unless it could be done. As he did it, as God took his form and came to us, that we might have inspiration and be lifted out of this delusion, this cosmic dream. And so we can, by following the Master, do as he did. We can be truly divine magnets. And in conclusion, realize spiritual magnetism is the power, the magnetic power of the omniscience of God. And you have a manifestation of that power right within you, if you will but look and see it. If you meditate deeply and you see at the Christ Center, you see behind that the ring of gold within of nameless hue. That's the manifestation of the greatest magnet that is, God's presence within you. It has its poles. It has the negative pole, the outer vibrating pole of energy. It has the positive pole, just like an ordinary horseshoe magnet, of the inner ring of consciousness. You have the manifestation of the magnet right within you, the divine magnet. What are we to do? Merge in it. Be in the company of God's omniscience, morning, noon, and night, as the Master said. Be one with it. Merge in it. And then what will happen? Then God's power will flow through you. His great spiritual pulling power, the great divine power, the great magnetic power, the Master of the universe, will flow through you if it is His will. And then surely, truly, you will be a divine magnet.